So I have to share another Mike Leach story. Back in when Leach and the Texas Tech thing went down, Leach spent Blake, I think, 2 years with CBS, CBS Sports Radio, and doing some other things. So that gave me an opportunity to run Coach Leach down and have him on the show as an analyst, if you will. And once I got his number, I called him, and I didn't realize, so I didn't know as much about Mike Leach then, right? I don't know, a year or two later, Swing Your Sword would drop, and I've referenced Swing Your Sword, and we've had Feldman on who wrote Swing Your Sword with Mike Leach. But during that 2 years when he was in the media, I thought, man, this would be a cool time to have Coach Leach on, and he can just talk about whatever the hell he wants to talk about. And so, but I didn't know him like more about it, so much more about him today. And I didn't realize the rabbit hole that you go down when you call him randomly. You'll be on the phone for 27 minutes or 38 minutes or whatever. And he never big timed you. I mean, I've called hundreds of people. Okay. I'll call anybody to try to, or contact anybody to try to get on the show. And Mike was super nice. I mean, the first time I ever called him, he answered the phone. He's in the Keys. I'm like, hey, Coach Leach, this is what I do. I'd love to have you on my show. Would love to. Well, then he's like, where are you? Jackson, Mississippi. Well, then he goes down this rabbit hole of recruiting stories when he was at Valdosta. At Valdosta, they covered the Sun Belt. Valdosta's in Georgia, right? And so he would go on and on about the different things of driving through the Sun Belt and driving through Mississippi. And he'd be like, yeah, isn't there a town close to you called Vicksburg? Yes, there is, Coach. Okay, yeah. There was a player there. Isn't there a town? And so, as he's talking, Mike's always, his mind's moving 1,000,000 miles an hour, and he's connecting the dots. And so over that time before he went to Washington State, in between Texas Tech and Washington State, I would call him and we would talk, but you just had to know it was going to be at least 30 minutes because Mike needed to get into whatever he wanted to get into. And at that time, he'll do that now as a head football coach. You can only imagine Mike Leach in the Florida Keys with some downtime for a couple of years. And so I've told y'all there were two guys that I got on the phone that I thought, wow, I'm on the phone with these two men. And they'll just talk and talk and talk. And that's Mike Leach and Jerry Tarkanian, the former UNLV coach, who I just thought was the deal when I was growing up. Same deal. He'd just talk and talk and talk, which was great. You just let him, have a conversation with you. But I do want to piggyback off of what Steve Robertson said earlier in the show when he stopped by and talked about Mike Leach and the fact that he's in critical condition, and we're all hoping that he pulls out of it. And that is, Mike didn't big time anybody. He out in the middle of nowhere, United States, Cody, Wyoming, ends up at BYU. That's where he fell in love with throwing the ball around. Lavelle Edwards, long before Mike Leach became the coach, you've heard me reference two guys that I was kind of obsessed with, Lavelle Edwards and Eric Coryell. What they were doing out west was vastly different than what we were doing here when I was growing up. Spreading people out, throwing the ball around. And Mike Leach took a liking to that, didn't he? Jim McMahon, Robbie Bosco, Todd Detmer, all those dudes that were, Steve Young, obviously Hall of Fame quarterback, but all those guys that were going through BYU at the time, Mike, quirky, brilliant, Mike Leach was following BYU football like crazy, and that would eventually change and revolutionize the game of high school, college, and NFL football. And when you get into Swing Your Sword, he talks about the aha moment of going to BYU as an undergrad student and seeing what Lavelle Edwards was doing compared to what everybody else was doing. The Midwest and the Southeast at that time was just, run heavy, run oriented. And that worked for a lot of teams. But Mike looked at it like, hey, this guy doesn't have as much talent, Lavelle Edwards, as some of the teams he's playing. But he's come up with this offense and the scheme that they can beat people by spreading them out. And then Mike ends up going to Pepperdine. He's like, all right, I got a law degree. And Pepperdine's a hell of a school, as y'all know. I've been by their campus. A hell of a school. I could never get into Pepperdine Law School, as y'all know, listening to the show. And from there, he gets into coaching. He ended up at the United States Sports Academy getting a master. I mean, I actually thought about that like 23 years ago. Isn't that weird? Because I would always pass it going to the beach. Now, I don't know where Mike stumbled upon it, but he got a master's from the United States Sports Academy in Mobile. And that's where he talked about going to the Floribama. I mean, Mike is tied, in so many different places and spaces. And, of course, he coached down here before taking the Mississippi State job. He was at a couple of stops. He was at Valdosta in Georgia. And that, you talking about you asked John Bond, you talking about a fertile ground and a committed area of high school and college football is Valdosta and Valdosta State. But he weaves this story throughout. Most coaches' books are not good, right? Swing Your Sword. Y'all have heard me reference it probably 100 times on the show. And way before I ever knew Mike Leach would ever become the head coach at Mississippi State, or Ole Miss for that matter. He had been rumored in the mix during some coaching changes the last 20 years we've been on the show to both. Swing Your Sword is awesome. Like, it's one that you start reading on the iPad or you get the book and you can't put it down because of the amazing stories that Mike has lived. Out of Bounds, ESPN 105.9 The Zone, brought to you by Superior Foundation for all your foundation repairs. Superior.ms. Blake Mania, I see that your mind is moving and working and rolling.
What are you going to, it's one of those days that you don't like, right, in this industry. This is one of those days where you wish you could kind of just turn it off, as we talked about in the first hour. Because it is, his impact on college football is profound. And it's easy to look at the big picture, right? Because we all like to see where do we stack up in life. We all hope that when our time comes, people talk about us the way people are talking about Mike Leach, right? Very few of us get this treatment. Most of us wish we would.
True.
Obviously, that's kind of, for a lot of people, it's like, okay, how can I leave an impact that people will say, wow, we miss him when he's gone, or we miss her when she's gone. But I think of Mike Leach, too, on the micro level of, look at the 3 places he went, and look what he's done for all 3 football programs that he went to. And that's just such a unique, yes, he has made a worldwide impact on football. Sure. From the high school to the college to the NFL level. We know that. His philosophy is there. But on the micro level, look at what he did for Lubbock, Texas, Pullman, Washington, and Starkville, Mississippi. And whoever, the guys who took over after him at Tech and at Washington State found that place infinitely better than when he got there. And I think that will be the case whenever it does happen for Starkville, Mississippi as well. Because what he's done on the field has been massive in terms of, bringing the football program into the 21st century.
Yeah, yes, the passing game, no question about it. According to Steve Robertson, he does not think that Mike Leach will coach again. We're just all hoping and praying for a pretty damn good, if not full, recovery. So we'll keep you updated as much as we can. He's in critical condition at UMC. You're listening to the Out of Bounds Show, ESPN 105.9 The Zone. Tom Luganbill will share some stories. He's known Mike Leach for 20 years. Tom Luganbill on the Yingling Lager guest line. Coming up next, lunch today brought to you by Bulldog Burger in Ridgeland. Bulldog Burger, Lake Harbor in Ridgeland. Tom Luganbill and Mike Leach coming up next.